If you're going to have cables on your desk, might as well make sure they're pretty. Either that or you're into the custom mechanical keyboard scene and you've already spent too much money before watching this video. Now it's time to spend some more. Today we're looking at USB cables for your keyboard, or whatever else you decide to use with such pretty cables. We're going to look into the custom ones, the whys and hows of what dictates a $50 to $100 price tag for handmade custom cables and the mass-produced cables, and what determines quality. And before you comment why anyone would want to spend that much money on a cable, you can turn that question right around to any novelty item. Now let's get into this. First thing we're going to go over is the anatomy of a cable. At the ends of the cable you have the terminal. Usually the terminal includes some type of housing to protect the connector. For the most part, the cable usually has a heat shrink, while some use a plastic housing. From here you have what is called a lead. The lead is usually referred to as the part of the cable attached to the terminal and goes towards the coil. Not all cables have a coil, even with custom ordered cables. For the sake of the video, we're only going to cover coiled cables. The coil is mostly self-explanatory, but the ends of the coil are usually associated with the term exit coil. The next part is the detachable. The detachable is where the cable can detach from itself, as you can probably tell from the term. As you can see, there are different types of detachables, the most popular being the aviator detachable, which uses a screwed collar to secure itself. Another popular detachable is a push-pull connector, which uses a spring-loaded sleeve to push and pull the connector together and apart. The detachable gives you the flexibility to attach a different device connector type. Just make sure that the device connector portion of the cable comes from the same cable maker or manufacturer. They also provide flexibility when storing your cables, since it can be separated in half. They're also very aesthetic and can come in a variety of colors. Now, as you can probably notice, these cables come in a variety of fun colors. Some of them also have a neat dimensional look to them. Most cables use a paracord sleeving that wraps around the wire itself. Some higher end cables use a material called MDPCX as the base instead of the paracord. Then sometimes you'll notice a mesh type of material on top of the base, which is called TechFlex. Now TechFlex is a brand. It's not the name of the material, but most artisan cable makers use TechFlex. It's hard to find out whether or not mass-produced cables use TechFlex in particular, but for simplicity, we're going to refer to it as TechFlex in the video. Again, not every cable uses this, but a lot of cables do this to emulate different types of thematic colorways. Without getting too heavy into the terminology, let's leave it at that. Now that you understand the basic anatomy of a USB Mech cable, let's look at what determines quality between the different price brackets of cables. The high-end cables are from Voxel, drag cables, calamity cables, and define cables. These are all custom-made, 100% handmade artisan cables. The mass-produced cables we have are from Mixo, Ducky, and Matrix. These cables are not customizable, at the time of this recording at least, so you buy whichever colorway best suits you. These cables are not handmade and are made at a higher capacity, obviously. The cable from Matrix goes for about $35, Mixo is about $40, the Ducky cable is $45, and the custom cables can range anywhere from $50 to $100 depending on the options and who you buy from. So what exactly determines or warrants a price north of $65 for a USB cable? Well, let's start at the top from the buying experience. When ordering a custom handmade cable, there are a few different ways that ordering takes place. Some offer a group buy format that allow you to customize the cable within the colorway theme of the group buy. Another type is ordering through a site as an individual sale. For example, Calamity Cables and Define Cables shows all the different colors and options you can choose from, and you can pretty much pick out whatever you want. And lastly, Drag Cables and Voxel Mods offer a one-on-one consultation service on exactly how you want your cable. The options are quite vast and really let you go all out in customizing your cable exactly how you want it, including what works best for your desk layout and the size, and how to match a cable perfectly to a theme you're going for. Voxel, for example, will even build a small sample of the materials and color combos to give you an idea of how the cable will come out. You don't have to know everything about cables either. These guys are more than happy to go over and explain any terminology or questions you have and give you the best experience possible to know exactly what you're getting. Now let's go over some of the options you can customize. Granted, every artisan cable maker can have some differences in what they can customize, but here's a few to name off. You can choose the length of the cable and the coil, the color of the heat shrink and the color of the detachable, which type of detachable, the color of the base, and the TechFlex. What type of layout for the cable in terms of directions on the leads, the size of the coils, heat shrink accents on the detachable itself, and even the choice to do multiple colors on the same cable or even on the coil. Not every artisan cable maker has all these options available, but this gives you an idea of how much you can customize to fit a theme perfectly for what you're looking for. This cable I got from Vauxhall is an all-out exhibit of how much customization you can get into. Obviously, when ordering a mass-produced non-artisan cable, you'll be picking from a catalog of different cable colorways from a website. That's a basic rundown of what the ordering process is like and some of the options you can customize. Now let's understand the physical quality traits to look for. An easy thing to notice is the quality of the coil. Is the coil uniform? Looking at the coils from Vauxhall, Drag, Calamity, and Define, they're all near perfect. Are all the coils uniform in size and gap between each other? If we take a look at the cable from Ducky, you can see the coil is pretty wavy and slightly tilted as well. Same thing goes from the cable from Matrix. You can try and realign these cables and try to keep them straight, but the wire itself has a memory and will reform back to its original shape over time that it came out of the box. The cable from Mixo is straighter than the other two, however there are lumps in the cable straightness. The individual coils at least stand up straight, whereas the other two are more slanted. Upon closer inspection to the Mixo cable, we can see some of the coils at the end have some slightly larger gaps than the rest of the coil. The next thing to notice is the exit coils on each side. Looking at the cable from Vauxhall, you notice that the last coil on each side perfectly matches the rest of the coils in uniformity. On the cheaper cables, you'll notice the coil either being too big or too small or slanted of sorts. This is where the most error probably occurs for the mass-produced cables, as it is the most difficult section of the coil to remain uniform. Last thing to note is how strong the coils are, meaning will they stretch out over time. Most coiled cables should retain their coils over a long period of time. Each of these cables have coils that snap back into place nicely, so it's safe to say they will last a while. The Mixo cable uses a different jacket on the wire and can be stretched out quite far and retain its shape. However, most of these cables are solid in terms of going back to form after being stretched. Regardless, you should take care of your cable and try not to stretch out the coils, as you're paying good money for this. Next thing to look at is the lead. From the high-end cables, we should be expecting leads to be mostly straight. Keep in mind you can have different kinds of leads that suit best to your needs. Some are in line with the coil, and some are at a 90-degree angle from the coil. Most of the time with the mass-produced cables, they use a 90-degree format between the lead going to the keyboard and the coil. However, Mixo offers a 45-degree, which gives you the flexibility to go either in line or 90 degrees. It's a bit funky looking, but it offers a choice at this price range of around $40. Do I find it visually pleasing? Not necessarily, but it's there. Now with custom artisan cables, you obviously choose what type of angle you want with the lead. The lead should be straight, whereas if we look at Matrix and Ducky, they are wavy. But again, this is all about what you're comfortable with in terms of price and your standards for when it comes to your cable. Next, we take a look at the TechFlex, which is that mesh material on the cable. Also, keep in mind, like I said earlier, TechFlex is a brand, not the name of the material. Some companies could use an off-brand TechFlex mesh material, but those specifications are hard to find. On the mass-produced cables, the mesh is mostly consistent. The one from Mixo has some pieces of the TechFlex that have larger gaps and inconsistencies, which will always happen to some degree since it's a mesh. But there are noticeable gaps in a lot of places around the coil. One from Ducky and Matrix both have some form of debris in the TechFlex. This won't happen every time you buy a mass-produced cable, but don't be surprised to see this on the occasion. Looking at the terminals of the cable, they mostly use a heat shrink, except for the Ducky cable, which uses a plastic housing instead. The plastic housing with the USB stamp on it reminds me of a generic USB charging cable I would find on Amazon. Also, looking at the TechFlex meeting the housing, some of the strands are broken around the edge. Now, the heat shrink on the Matrix cable is mostly decent. However, there is a slightly visible seam on the white heat shrink, and it also seems to be bent upwards where the cable meets the heat shrink. The heat shrink application on the Mixo cable is pretty decent and doesn't seem to have noticeable imperfections. And of course, it should go without saying the heat shrink on the terminals on the high-end cables look solid and are in line with the lead. Next up is the detachable connector. Like I said, not every cable comes with these, most of them do. So that's why I'm including it in the video. With detachables, it can be a bit trickier depending on where the cable manufacturer or artisan cable maker sources their parts. The best way to determine quality is honestly looking at the finish on it. Looking at the Matrix cable, it seems that there is no finish on it whatsoever. Compare that to the Ducky cable and you can see a nice polished look to it because it's finished. It looks good too. No inconsistencies or random dents to be seen. It looks solid. The Mixo cable has a push-pull detachable instead of the aviator, but the push-pull looks good. It has some very small spots on the surface, but it's very hard to notice even up close. Now, when we're talking about painted detachable connectors, this is where the quality comes more into play. Taking a look at the cable from Vauxhall, the finish is very clean with no noticeable blemishes or scratches to the paint. Same goes for the cable from Calamity and Drag and Define. Define. These colored aviator connectors use a Cerakote finish, which works very well. Mixo offers a colored aviator connector as well, however it uses an E-coat, which has noticeable imperfections to the paint. The Cerakote finish is more costly than the E-coat, of course, so that's why there's that exchange. And that's it, mostly in terms of quality for the cable. The last thing to make note of is the packaging. The fanciest packaging goes to Matrix. The packaging uses a molded foam to hold the cable, which is a very secure way to transport it. However, it's overkill. It's difficult to get the cable out of the foam without stretching the coils. On the other hand, the ducky cable comes in a plastic bag, and that's about it. With the Artisan cables, they usually come in a box with the cable wrapped in bubble wrap, which is perfect. The one from Define comes in shredded paper, but supports the cable nicely. The bubble wrap and shredded paper is protective enough without squishing or holding the cable too tight. It's very simple, it does its job, and that's all it has to be. Depending on who you order from, you may also receive some goodies, which is a nice extra touch. From Drag, you get these 2 squishies, which make a great fidget device for me. Voxel comes with Sour Patch Kids, novelty stickers, and a card of authenticity and quality control. Keep in mind, every cable that is made by hand has to go through quality control and inspection by hand. The cable has to work with high-powered boards like the Drop Control and others. So they all have to go through some sort of testing in order for the cable to be finalized and finished. You can expect decent quality control from the mass-produced cables as well, at least the ones I have here today. You should expect them to power any keyboard. However, in terms of the finer build quality details, they aren't individually inspected and tested for every cable that goes out the door, at least from the information I can grab from their respective sites. Now that you have these elements in mind and you know what to look for in terms of quality, you can then determine what will best fit your budget. And also, a lot of these things can be preference. If you don't mind having some inconsistencies in your coil or how straight the leads are, that's up to you. With an Artisan cable, you're looking at very tight quality tolerances with very little to no room for error, as it should be at this price point. Some of the concerns you may have when ordering a custom cable is perhaps what kind of time frame you would expect to receive your cable. If you're buying into a group buy, it will take a few months, as that is the norm for most group buy options for anything in the mech keyboard space. If you're buying a custom cable from an individual sale, it can take anywhere between 1 to 3 weeks. Another concern would be who you're buying from. Is the cable maker established? They should at least have a catalog of cables they have made to authenticate their quality of work. Also, they should have some form of return policy in case you're unhappy with their work, if they gave you a dead cable or anything of the like. Accountability must be considered for the prospect of the consumer, and that should be addressed. Every cable I have in this video works fine and as expected. Quality aside, they all do their intended purpose. No matter who you're buying from, whether it's a mass-produced cable or artisan, they should list out the kind of quality to expect from their products. And those are the differences you'll find in between quality, customization, and buying experience between the high-end cables and the mass-produced ones. Again, do what's best to fit your budget. An important takeaway here is to know what you're paying for at the different price tiers. Links to everything will be listed in the description below in case you're interested. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.